I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today we are talking about Interstellar, the 2014 film written by Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan, directed by Christopher Nolan. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So Interstellar is a big swing. It is, on one hand, this hard sci-fi. There's no sound in space. We're trying to save humanity. It's epic. It's emotional. It's all these things. And then it's also love is the fifth dimension, and love is quantifiable. And you can send coordinates through like bookshelves and gravity and stopwatches. And
yeah,
it's just obviously. And I remember the hype leading up to this. I was so excited because it's Christopher Nolan going to space. Like, Christopher Nolan, probably the most well-known director of like this generation, of his generation. And he'd done The Dark Knight. He'd done all these kind of terrestrial works, but now he's going to space. And I love sci-fi and I love space movies. And then right out the gate, we're talking about ghosts in the bedroom. And it was a very strange vibe. We're on Earth, but something's wrong. There's no more okra, I guess. Like, what is this world that we're living in? I can't quite hear what we're talking about. Now we're blasting into space after he caught a drone, but that didn't have anything to finding the coordinates. It was a very, very strange, like, first viewing of this film in IMAX. And I've had a complicated relationship with it ever since, and kind of ended up feeling not great about it and didn't revisit it for a long time. We made a video about it, analyzing the crosscut sequence that happens sort of toward the end of Act 2, where, surprise Matt Damon is trying to destroy everything. And talked in that video about how it was a little lackluster for some of us anyway, the kind of cross-cutting between the stakes of humanity as, like, humanity full stop is in jeopardy, and also the corn is on fire, and maybe the coughing kid is going to cough more. Rewatching it now, though, I really liked it watching this time. I think because I knew what to expect, because the things that I knew were going to annoy me, I could anticipate. And because I had seen it enough to understand what exactly the plot is, because there's a lot of exposition that gets dumped on you really fast on that first watch. And it's a little hard to track exactly the names, the people, where they went where, who cares about when, and time dilation is happening. So there's this kind of almost time travel element. There's a paradox where he's sending himself. Anyway, there's a lot of complicated stuff. Underneath that, there's a pretty compelling story about humanity trying to save itself. And I even found some themes that I want to talk to you guys about. There's a central conversation between Matthew McConaughey's character, Coop, and Anne Hathaway's character that kind of talks about evil and nature as it's only the evil that we bring with us. And that framing device helped me interface with this movie a lot more this time. So it's a big swing. I think it hits a lot of things, and I think it misses other things. And I'm really excited to talk about all of that. We're going to watch a scene from the movie and kind of do some dissecting of it a little bit later and talk about the lessons that we're taking away from it. I'm curious, though, Trisha, what do you make of Interstellar?
Well, me too. It's really similar to my take, actually. I remember being just sort of okay, movie. The first time around, it's really astonishing to look at, and that has always been true.
Yeah.
It's very spectacular. It was incredibly well received at the time by critics, and did enormously well at the box office. And it is just a stunning spectacle of filmmaking. And at least in this case, I remember being very annoyed by Inception, and I remember just the experience of watching this being like more fun for me at the time. But it ultimately didn't mean a lot to me personally. And then, we did the video on it, and there have always been parts of it that I just find to be silly. And not the least of which are some of the casting.
Just half the cast of Good Will Hunting shows up halfway through.
What was the thought process? In some of these choices. But the silliness aside, we can get to it. But the design of those robots has never worked for me. Like, I don't understand. Why do they look? Why? Why would they look like that?
Why do they talk like that?
Why would they look like that? Everything. Yeah, they have not worked for me. But like you, I was out in front of those things. And in the meantime, I was kind of able to like soak up the vibes and kind of get invested in the relationship and do the most generous thematic read of it possible. And found some actual themes to dive into that are textually supported and are interesting in and of themselves. And so, I just overall had a better time around than I was like braced for. And I think there's a lot that's praiseworthy here. I think there's plenty to learn. And that's really what I'm excited about.
Absolutely. Nice. Okay, cool. Alex, what about you? How are you feeling about Interstellar these days?
Yeah. These days is a good way to put it because I'm similar to Trisha. I think we're all having a similar journey with this journey of a movie, which is the initial viewing being and then returning to it and understanding kind of what it is and accepting it for what it is. For me, I was right there with you, Michael, where, Christopher Nolan had hit this peak in the years preceding, with The Prestige, The Dark Knight. I loved Inception. So it's just like, this guy can do no wrong. And then Dark Knight Rises is like, okay, that was a little strange, but, impossible task. You're following the Dark Knight. Who could even do that? But, oh my God, original movie, space movie, Interstellar, that's going to be amazing. I cannot wait for like the hard sci-fi Christopher Nolan in space movie. Gonna be so good. And then like you, Michael, it was like, we're Dust Bowl corn. Like these are the vibes of the Christopher Nolan space movie. And then, all the things you guys have already called out threw me for such a loop on the first viewing. I was so unsettled by it that it was hard for me to appreciate the film on its own merits. But I have watched it quite a few times since then. And there are a lot of kind of beautiful thematic ideas, really interesting kind of debates that are actually happening in the film. It's just delivered in, I would say, an often quite clunky way. But we can get into all that. So really also ditto to what you guys have been saying. Just, I appreciate this movie for what it is now, but there are a lot of choices that it makes that are still quite baffling to me. And even down to the edit and the way some things just kind of cut between each other, or even the pacing or the way scenes are kind of abruptly cut off. They seem like they're intentional choices, but I can't tell why. And so just the filmmaker part of me is just constantly getting kind of bumped by this movie in a way that is just disappointing because other Nolan films don't bump me that way. And I'm a sci-fi fan, so I want to love his sci-fi movie. And it's just, as much as I can find here to appreciate, I can't love it because there are so many bumps.
Yeah. I am excited to talk about the scene we're going to dive into later, because I think it's an example of where the editing really shines. And I think there's a lot of structural elements to the story and how it's constructed that are really good, like macro. Like if you kind of blur your eyes to like squint past some of the bumpier stuff, like the shape of it, I think is really interesting and worth studying. Brian, how do you feel about Interstellar?
Well, real quick, I want to say that I really like that we're kicking off Big Swing Summer with Interstellar, because I'm really fascinated by Nolan's trajectory at this time. Like I saw Insomnia in the theater because I was like, the Memento guy made another movie. It's Robin Williams' opportunity. And I like that movie, fine. But it was like, I was already a fan like that early. And then it's like, he does Batman Begins and The Prestige. It was like, oh, this guy is here. This guy is on the scene. He's doing two wildly different things. They're both really successful. And then it was Dark Knight and Inception, which was just like, oh man, he is stepping it up, but like he is pushing against the boundaries of like what you can really get away with and how ambitious you can be. But like he's doing it, you know, and these movies are working. And then Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar, which just felt like we're beyond the boundaries a little bit here. We're just kind of like we're trying to one up ourselves in the biggest way possible, right? And you know, there's a lot to like about both those movies. I think there's more to like about Interstellar than Dark Knight Rises, but both feel like overambitious to me. They feel like big swings in a way that was just you were trying to do too much, you know. But at the same time, I thought Dunkirk was so refreshing to be like, now we're going to go do something completely different, right? If anything, Tenet almost feels like beating a dead horse, which is like, we're doing another time reality bendy thing. It's like, well, but okay, relax, right? And then Oppenheimer is like the Dark Knight of of Dunkirk, where it's like, now we're doing like the next step up, you know, now he's doing like fantasy. I'm like, all right, sure, why not? With another surprise Matt Damon. But I just find it really fascinating to see like what he has tried and sort of when it feels like it's going too far and when it doesn't. So yeah, for me personally, I feel like this was around the time where I started to get bumped off the Nolan, the Bronco, right? I didn't wildly have any strong feelings to this movie at all when I saw it. I was like, Matthew McConaughey is in your like fourth dimension movie. It's like the rom-com Dazed and Confused guy. And then like in the year between when it was announced and when the movie came out, I think like True Detective and Dallas Buyers Club came out. And I was like, oh, okay, yes, this absolutely is what I want to see as you're leading your movie. And yeah, I saw the movie. Sam Rockwell was in my screening. That was weird. And I liked it fine. And then I think over the years I've sort of been like, oh yeah, that movie, that one, whatever. And then like you guys are saying, rewatching it, I was just like, oh, hell yeah. Like there's plenty of bumpiness in this movie and plenty of stuff that does feel silly or doesn't feel earned. But it also is just like the stuff you pulled off, you really pulled off. Someone shows emotion in a Christopher Nolan movie, which is like refreshing because I can name like two maybe.
Some of the women live through this movie.
Right, yeah.
A couple of them survive it,
the wife is already dead, so that's not a whole thing.
Yeah, it's great.
So yeah, I was like very pleasantly surprised watching it this time that like despite the bumps was just like really being like, oh yeah, this is like maybe not top 5, but not far off of my Nolan movies and feels more close to the ones that I love than the ones that I love less, let's say.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Well, yeah, as Alex was saying, I feel like we're all on a similar journey here. And I agree. I think this is a really great movie to start off our big swing summer season. You know, we're going to be talking about La La Land, AI, artificial intelligence, Cloud Atlas, Romeo and Juliet, Pulp Fiction, The Fountain, all these movies that are so ambitious. And anytime you take a big swing, you're kind of playing without a safety net. And that's a risk, and there's some bravery to that. And I think the result of that is something that is absolutely going to be worth studying, because you're going to hit things that you couldn't have hit if you weren't aiming so high.
Right.
But you're also going to miss in some pretty big ways sometimes. And that exposes important lessons that, you know, everyone can learn from. And I think this movie has, I feel like almost the robots in some ways are that like encapsulated, the TARS robots, where it's just like, yeah, that's a big swing. And there's things about it that are logical and make sense of like, yeah, in the future, why would an AI robot voice sound robot-y? It can just sound like a normal person. In practice, it confuses the hell out of me because I don't know who's speaking most of the time. And the design is, yeah, I've never seen a robot like that before. Maybe there's a reason. Like there's both of those things happening all at once.
Big asterisk summer.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So to start kind of in the first act of this movie, there's the first act is about 40 minutes. It takes some time to like get established before we launch up. And there were a lot of details that I had forgotten. And some of the world building, I think it does well and kind of lets you 2+2 what has happened to planet Earth, some sort of post-climate change / blight with this vague bad disease that's eating the plants is happening. So there's enough specificity for me to generally understand what's going on, but not like beating me over the head with it. At the same time, there's some exposition that's very on the nose, and the scene where Matthew McConaughey is sitting outside, and the grandfather character is basically telling him his character arc and his backstory, and just like,
here's who you are.
Right, here's who you are. Here's what you always wanted. You can get a chance to do this thing, and you really have to care about this and not this other thing. So I feel like there's kind of classic Nolan on the nose dialogue, but also some interesting world building and kind of not the setup for this kind of movie that I would have expected. Like this is a movie ultimately about the Earth is dying. There is no saving the Earth, and we need to leave. And I think that was actually one of the things that was hard for me the first time, is like I didn't get that exactly until pretty late. It felt like we were still trying to save the Earth, but no, the Earth is no longer being able, like, you can't save it anymore. And also there's this weird, Apollo missions have been corrected. And so there's all this stuff getting set up. Some of it seems really important and clear. Other parts, I can't quite make what it's trying to say or what exactly it's trying to set up about the world, about Cooper's character arc, and just kind of thematically what it wants me to care about. And so it's a very interesting first 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's really interesting you call out that first act, Michael, because once again, as I was saying, in that first viewing, that's where I was really thrown for a loop. My expectations were in one place, and this movie was giving me some very different things. And one of those things right off the bat was this very casual talk of a ghost. And I think it's really indicative of, I think, a problem that runs throughout this movie for me, which is we're told things, and things are kind of very casually, almost offhand said, that are really important or really shocking or actually like very strange, but the time isn't given to soak in, what did that person just say actually? What does it actually mean? I didn't actually register that because it wasn't presented to me in a way that would suggest like, this is a big deal, or this is this kind of a thing. And so when you have a character who thinks their room is haunted by a ghost, there are movie tropes one can use for that scenario. Like you could have an opening scene, which could be really cool in this movie, of young Murph in bed, freaked out because things are moving in her room or something falls over, and it could be shot in a way that suggests like a little bit of a horror movie thing of like, I'm freaked out by this supernatural thing in my room, and she's bringing it to her dad. Her dad doesn't believe her because he's a scientist. Like, you could set up the ghost thing in an interesting cinematic way. Instead, it's kind of like in that traditional kind of Christopher Nolan, we're just like talking fast and getting through things because there's so much to get through. Just got to get through it. They're like having breakfast, and she's like, yeah, I'm a ghost. I did another thing. And he's like, your ghost, you better do some scientific like quantifying of your ghost. And so like my brain, especially on a first viewing, is like, I think she said ghost, but they're just talking about it kind of like it's another, like do your homework, Murph. And so this thing that is going to be like pivotal to the finale of the movie, and is this kind of thing that she even references in adulthood, like, yeah, my ghost, it's not set up with the kind of power or reverence you would think that this central thing should have, using the tools of cinema to introduce us to a concept. And I think there's a lot early in this movie where, we're setting up the world, and when they get to the NASA headquarters by following the coordinates spelled out in the dust,
by the ghost using gravity.
Ghost using gravity. We then go into this really rapid fire montage where it's just like, hey, welcome. Good thing you're an astronaut because we know who you are and you know who we are maybe. And hey, I'm going to press this button and this wall's going to open up. There's a spaceship. Let's walk around now. And oh, by the way, the world's definitely going to end because of the blight. That's done. Also, we need you to come. Also, Dr. Mann is the best of us. 12 of them here on the wall. Like there's so many of those things are
Sorry, did you say wormhole or black hole? Both.
Yeah. Who's them? Who's they?
Yeah.
So like these are really big ideas, really consequential plot points to understand this movie, and we're breezing by them as if they're like items in a grocery list. And so I think that is one of my biggest bumps overall with this movie is, and I understand that there's so many ideas to pack in here that there's not time to really let them land in the way they need to land, but that is a problem. And I think throughout the movie, there's those moments where it's just like that. This guy was on a spaceship for like 25 years or something, 20 years. And they're like, wow, that sucks. And then it's like, we kind of move on. It's like, that's monumental. This guy was alone for like multiple decades.
I've waited years.
Yeah. Which is like, yeah. So I think that's the weird thing about this movie is it's playing with these big things and we don't have time to give them the weight that they deserve.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. I will also say, though, about the opening act is that a lot of it worked for me this time. Like, I really did appreciate the sort of agrarian near future climate catastrophe drama of it all. And I was really compelled by the family relationships. As clunky as the exposition is, I was really interested in Murph and Coop and like their situation and this small town where, you know, they've got their baseball field. And I was just, I really, it had this great texture to it. And, you know, it felt, because it was supposed to, documentary-like, where you have the interviews of people looking back on it. It's like, you know, I know that Christopher Nolan loved the Ken Burns documentary about the Dust Bowl. Who doesn't? And like wanted to reference that and kind of sort of instantly drop you into a comparable historical moment where there are material stakes for everybody on the ground. And so like, even though there's an annoying sort of lack of specificity about what is the climate disaster and how long do we think Earth has left? Like, it would be easy to give me that information sooner, right? Or like, have huge swaths of the world population already died because of famine? Like, that would be something good for me. Again, there's missing expository information, but at the same time, I think the focus of it overall works really well. And I was really feeling it this time. I think the performances are lovely too. Baby Timothée Chalamet, look, there he is.
Right.
He's just like there to change a car tire and whatever. That being said, there are some detours in the first act. The biggest one for me being the drone of it all, which comes back to matter not in any way. Mm-hmm. Not in any way. And it's not that it's doing no narrative work. It's giving us some character information about Coop and his background. You know, like, look, he can fix a computer on the fly. Like he's both like good at technology and also willing to take risks, right? It's kind of foreshadowing his maneuver later where he has to go dock with the ship and he has to be quick on his feet and audacious and those things. So
and some story world stuff, like
it's doing
Indian
some story
drone.
world
Yeah,
stuff.
what does that mean?
Totally, militaries and world powers no longer exist. Everyone's just a farmer now, I guess. But at the same time, it is a detour. Like, it feels like it's going to be of narrative importance when it happens, right? Like, oh my God, is he going to catch the drone? What's he going to find on the drone? What information is it going to present him with that's going to tip the next narrative domino? And it isn't there to do that. And that is kind of confusing. And then the scene with the teachers where he's having his parent-teacher conference, I think is really doing really interesting thematic work, which I didn't clock the first time around or any subsequent time arounds until this time, which is, you know, they get into this argument about the textbook being changed about the moon landing and stuff. And of course it makes Coop really angry. But it does raise this point of, the teacher saying, I think this was a brilliant piece of propaganda. I think we needed to do this. We needed to fake the moon landing to get the Soviets to bankrupt themselves. And we were, busy doing other things with our money for survival reasons. We were solving other problems. And they were chasing this silly dream. And one of the themes that stood out to me this time around was, this theme of like dishonesty and like human deceit, and that it raises that point right up front and kind of postures it in the way that I think, or positions that question of human deceit alongside survival, right? Which I think the movie's really interested in. Like, is human deceit necessary for survival? Do we have to be essentially dishonest and stab each other in the back and lie to each other and lie to ourselves or our loved ones in order to really survive? Or can we expect better from people? And I don't know. I think it's a slow first act in some ways. I also think the military drone thing was just Christopher Nolan feeling like, oh no, we have to have some action in the first act, right? Because otherwise there isn't action until you get to the dust storm part. So it feels a little shoehorned in, but there is other really interesting narrative and thematic work happening in the first act, bumpy as it may be.
In fairness to the drone, I think it ties into the magnetic problems in the area because it's followed up by like a bunch of automated farm vehicles are also like descending on his house because of the gravity.
But that also doesn't like super duper make sense.
Anyway, so
like
there's a mild attempt to tie it into like the gravity distortions happening at his house, but not the strongest connection.
Yeah.
We've seen this movie a combined 10 times. Like, if we're not sure, then it means there's an issue.
Yeah.
A couple things off of everything you guys were saying. Tricia, you used the word texture, and I wanted to mention that too, totally separate from the actual structure of this act, just the Nolan texture of a movie, like just the Hans Zimmer score, or Ludwig Göransson, in the later movies, the editing, the cinematography that doesn't even feel like cinematography, but there's still something very purposeful about it, like just everything, just the overall mood. Even rewatching Oppenheimer, when we talked about it in the podcast, a movie that I'm not super excited about, was just like, I just like the feel of this. It's like, I don't even need the characters to be speaking in like words, I just could kind of like watch and listen to this thing that you're doing here. And I think Interstellar is a great example of when that works, it works really well. So like the drone sequence, right? I'm just watching the car go, watching the drone go, and listening to that score. I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm having a great time here. But then it's like, then we have the NASA exposition dump, right? Where it's just like, here's a lot of words about stuff, right? And another thing I was thinking about, again, divorced from this movie, but very appropriate, is like the difference between reading a script and watching a movie is like the actual text is, in one case, the only thing you have. And in the other case, sometimes like the last thing that's entering your brain, right? So it's like, you're like, oh, that's Michael Caine. I know him. And like, oh man, look at that production design. Listen to this score. It's great. I think they're saying words. I'm not sure what the words are, right? But when you're reading a script, you're like, oh, I can follow these like 2 pages of like complicated exposition because I can just sit here and reread a sentence if I want to, or do whatever. And that's just a weird, discrepancy, I think, between script and film. We've all, I'm sure, been watching movies where we're like, I don't think I know what anyone said for like 2 minutes. I think I should probably rewind. I was watching. I'm just not sure what anyone said. And Thomas Flight, friend of the podcast, he has a video called Nolan Has an Exposition Problem, I think. And he talks about when Nolan's exposition is people just saying lines at each other, and when it's showing, so you think the whole Inception, Leo showing the Elliot Page character, like how everything works. And you're just like, yeah, you're showing me, like you're showing a character, you're also showing me, right? Interstellar is the complete opposite, which is just like a 10-minute segment of people just like saying a lot of words about a lot of things to each other without a lot of, one, showing what you mean, or two, conflict. We get the conflict where it's like, hey, Coop, we think you should go. we're not showing you back. It's like, whoa, what do you mean? You know, you're like, oh, now I'm leaning forward because I'm like, there's conflict, there's character stuff. We've established the Murph relationship. I don't want that to be taken away, et cetera, et cetera. But then that's like 10% of this very long, here's a whole lot of information about the state of the world, right? Which we spent the last 25 minutes setting up some of, but not a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this movie I think has both examples of great Nolan exposition and, as we're saying, very clunky exposition. As you were speaking, Trisha, I was like, put a title card on there. Like, just make me read it. Like, give me the words, and then like you can skip some of this. Like, I think there are some movies and shows that use title cards to really great effect, and I think we're kind of afraid of that now. But I think
when you say title card, what do you mean specifically?
Like an opening?
card, like an opening title card, like, you know, Blade Runner, Top Gun
One of those.
style.
Okay, gotcha.
Just like, here's what's going on, everybody. Like, just give that in the first like 20 seconds, and then I'm kind of caught up to where I need to be. And I think that could reduce some of the need for extended exposition dumps, or we get further into the expositions. You can give the more important parts room to breathe, so it doesn't have to be rapid fire. Michael Caine's telling you about this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And I think giving that time to soak in everything a little bit more would help in some of these first act things. I think ultimately a lot of this is effective, and I want to talk about that, but I think something to reduce the amount of pressure on the first act to set everything up would help a little bit.
Yeah, just tell us world powers are no more. There are no more militaries. This is the 15th year of the blight. Famine is coming. Just, put it on a card. I agree.
Dying.
Or even a year, like, if you don't even want to say any of that, cut in. Give us just give us the year, the location. Anything like that would, again, save yourself some time.
One more thought about first act, then we should move on. But the contrary opinion to that, maybe, I do kind of like the ambiguity of the world we come into, and we're not getting like a lot of concrete information about there was the war and then the famine and blah, blah, blah. However, I think for me, the real problem is there's kind of almost, for Nolan, who's very nonlinear in a lot of ways, there's a very linear progression to the first act where it's like, first we're on the farm, then we got ghost stuff, then we got gravity stuff, and the gravity stuff's going to take us to NASA, and then that's going to tell us about this stuff, and then I'm going to decide to go. And I think there's a total rework of this first act you could do if you weren't relying on the dust particles to give you coordinates to lead you to NASA. If there was an ongoing conversation happening throughout the whole first act where Michael Caine drives out to their farm early on seeking an astronaut, a pilot for this program, you know, the call is being given to the protagonist. He refuses. I've got kids. That fix too. You know, and so there could be this ongoing back and forth through the whole first act about this is what's happening. You got to do this for your kids. No, I can't leave her here. And we could spread out all the information about the mission over time, as opposed to, oh crap, we got to do it all right now because we just got to NASA and we're already 40 minutes in. We got to get out of here. That could have been a really nice fix, and still maybe left the world ambiguous in the background.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To be clear, I like a lot of the ambiguity also. I think there are just certain things that the movie does need me to know. Right. And it's hard when I don't have a handle on those things. Yeah. So like if there are certain must know things, those are the things I'm talking about of making it clear.
And they are all said. Like I think even Michael Caine gives a timeline for the blight, but it's a part of a flurry of information, and so it's so easy to miss.
Right.
Yeah.
I was also wondering if like Murph in school could be a narrative tool for this, where it's like like a whole scene where the teachers are like, here's the history, here's where we are, like here's what's going on, but then like the teacher says something Murph doesn't agree with, and she's like, yeah, but what about this? And you know, I don't know what that would be, but then it's like, oh, you get like a fun conflict scene or whatever, but also guess what, we're accidentally we're without realizing it learning a whole lot of story world stuff here.
Right. Yeah, we could see Murph make the choice to get angry about what she learns instead of hearing about it in
a parent-teacher conference.
Although that scene is awesome.
It is.
And
taking our baseball game.
And in some ways, it's kind of like, there's so much good stuff here. It's almost like we don't have enough time for it all, and so many more things deserve like fully fleshed out scenes. And because we're trying to pack so much into this movie, they don't get the scenes they deserve. And so it's, in some ways, it's like the frustration is that there's so much good material here that I want to actually sit in and soak in and feel,
Right.
but I'm not allowed to feel it because we got to rush to the next thing so quickly.
Yeah, which I do think the second act gets to do because of all of the exposition that gets set up. And so I do want to talk about that. The last thing I want to call out is Coop's character arc is a little unclear to me. And I think by the end, it resolves sort of around maybe I need to believe in love, I guess, also. But like in terms of what's getting set up for him in the first act, I think it's pretty muddy, where it's sort of like he wants to go, he's a dreamer, he wants to explore space, but he also wants to stay and be with his kids, and it's good that he wants to stay, and it's bad that he wants to go, but it's also good that he wants to go because you need to save the world, and it's bad that you want to say, like, I feel like there's a lot of muddy contradiction around how I'm supposed to feel about Coop doing really anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is just a weird place. That was one of the things that was hard for me that first time, as he's driving away from the farm and the countdown is happening and the music is swelling and it's like momentum. I'm like, I get the energy. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about his decision, though.
Right.
Right. Although coming off The Last of Us, I was able to appreciate Coop as the anti-Joel. He's like, screw you, daughter. I got to go save humanity.
Right. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the second act becomes almost for a long time a different movie.
Yeah.
And that's another not a problem, but I remember the first time feeling a little bit lost because I'm like, I was really invested in Murph and everything with Murph and their drama life on the farm. And then she really vanishes and it becomes a space adventure movie and we have a wisecracking robot here and there's, all this sort of banter on the space station. And then, we're off onto the next thing. We're going to go explore all of these planets. And it does shift into a totally different mode and then shifts kind of back at the midpoint and then tries to kind of marry those two things, right when Murph becomes Jessica Chastain, basically, and then it just becomes both of their stories or tries to be both of their stories equally, probably to its own detriment. I do wonder, we've criticized before the runtime of Nolan movies and all movies these days, and it's like, I agree with you, Alex, there's so much on the terrestrial storyline that I do care about. Like, I care about those characters. I spend a lot of time with them in the first act. And then I miss them when they go away. And I actually don't know a lot about Brand, Anne Hathaway's character. I know nothing about Romilly. I like him. American Beauty guy is there. Sorry, what's his name?
Wes Bentley's.
Wes Bentley's there.
Yeah, I don't know what
What's his character name
is, though.
even? Yeah.
Doyle?
Doyle. Oh, poor Doyle. R.I.P. But like, I wish I knew more about those people. Like, would this be better as a TV series, or is there enough here to make it a limited series? That would be so cool. Like, in like a The Right Stuff or like kind of a way. Like, let's spend time with all of these astronauts. Let's spend time with their families and see what's going on. I don't know. It just, I agree with you that the pace of it feels like it's really hurtling into something different in the second act. And then the second act just blazes by as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the astronaut team, and especially Anne Hathaway's character, Brand. There's things that happen in the second act that feel like they really need setup, like this idea that she was in love with one of the astronauts that went in the original mission. There's not a whole lot of setup in the terrestrial section about her connection to these astronauts that left, except for her kind of saying, Dr. Mann was the best of us, or they're all extraordinary. And there's kind of this moment where Cooper like kind of checks with the computer, like if she knew this guy, but like I don't know what his motivation is in that moment, why he like is investigating that. They also have a really kind of chilly relationship at first on the ship, even though they kind of seemed fine on Planet's side. She's kind of like saying, "Don't talk to me," and so there's these things where it's like I go into the second act, I'm on the ship with them, and I feel like I'm already behind. I'm like missing something important about her character, and we kind of skipped over something, and I feel this gap there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, to the movie's credit, that like the second act happens, you go into space, and then it's just gorgeous, like for forever.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
For like several minutes, and just the way I love the way the space is shot. I feel like it's the kind of the best version I've seen of like how would you actually shoot this if you were to think about how you would practically shoot a spaceship flying through space and like mounting the camera on a fixed point like they do on the actual space shuttles and all these things. No sound in space, like the scale, the epicness, the love of like space exploration is just there and palpable, and for a nerd like me it's just amazing.
Also, Michael Caine's gonna just like say a poem as they go out, but like there's literally no context for why, but at the same time I'm like, hell yeah,
with the
this is
organ
exactly what I
music,
wanted happening.
yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like the filmmaking there does I think a really good job of setting the stakes of the mission and the believability of these are tiny humans in a tin can about to do the impossible. Like I feel like that is palpable and present in a way that I think is really effective. I think the Anne Hathaway character Brand is such a complicated aspect of this film because I love her on one hand, it's Anne Hathaway, she's great. I think the setup for her emotional relationship is there. Like I was able to detect it better the second time, where when she talks about what's his name? It's not Miller.
Edwards?
It's not Man.
Or
Edmonds.
Wolf Edmonds.
Thank
Wolf.
you.
Yes.
Yeah. She gives just like the little bit of the way she says his name, I think is what, sets off like Cooper's detection. And so I feel like there are aspects of that relationship and how it unfolds that feel kind of lovely and well observed. And I do buy that it's this emotional relationship that she's had to kind of let go of as much as one can, but you can't ever, like all of that I think is performed well. And then she also has to deliver these ridiculous monologues that are just really frustrating. There's a point at which she's getting pushback on like the scientificness of like what she's saying, and it felt to me like, oh, she's going to come back and make a really good solid science argument back about like, no, like this isn't emotional, this is like there's logical reasons to do this thing. And instead it's like maybe love is science, essentially. Like this kind of make believe multiple dimension that's like an interesting philosophy, but feels very strange coming out of the scientist in this critical moment who should clearly know that like the argument she's making is going to fall on deaf ears because it's not the one to make in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing that you guys all kind of touched on there, which is just like it's the shifts in her character, right? It's the like, hey, we're buddies, let's go to space. Hey, we're in space now, don't talk to me, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's like, unless I'm misremembering, she's the one who is giving Coop crap for being like, oh no, you just want to not go here because it's going to mean your daughters are going to age, but like we have to do it for the mission. You can't be thinking about your feelings. We have to think about what it is. And then like cut to, nah, I want to go there because love, and it's just like, well, like you can set up that character to be that person, that character, you have, just like some random version of this where it's like Coop is the scientist, is the pragmatic person, right? And then she's the one who's like, look, it's not all about numbers. Sometimes it's about, this is obviously a worse version of the movie, but like, I'm just saying like as a sort of simple example of that. So then when she's like, I can't explain why, but we need to go here. We need to do this thing. You're like, yeah, that makes sense for your character at the very least, right? But it feels like her character feels like a cartoon to me because she's just like by the fault of the script, she is just changing who she is every 30 minutes in the movie, and it feels extra whiplashy when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, I think in that monologue that is kind of infamous, she's given the unfortunate role of having to just literally say a thematic idea, which is kind of like, what if love actually is not just this fanciful thing for the humanities, but actually is this thing that when we experience it, it's a real phenomenon that is a physical reality of the universe and, you know, can transcend time and space. And I like that, you know, I like that kind of stuff. But I would love for the movie to kind of suggest that to me, or that could emerge organically out of the story versus like poor Anne Hathaway having to say it so explicitly. Yeah, as you said, Michael, in the context of a scientific debate, because then it makes her look like kind of a dumb scientist who doesn't know how to make her point in a way that will translate to other scientists, and it's just unfortunate.
Yeah. Yes to all of this. Are you guys saying that Christopher Nolan doesn't know how to write women?
What?
Hang on.
Yeah, they're just emotional and not logical. That's how they work, right?
I mean, she's right. Ultimately, like, you know,
right.
Like she is the one who is correct in the movie,
right?
For the movie's position,
yeah.
Thematically, but I do think, you know, again, I was doing a very earnest thematic read on it this time around. And I think I would love it, again, if the action of the script was doing all of the thematic lifting, because it is at other points. Like, I think that the encounter with Dr. Mann, as annoying as I find Matt Damon... Why did I literally yelled in the movie theater when they unzipped the thing and Matt Damon?
Right. So
it was like a ripple that went out through the theater. We were just like, what? Wild.
Also,
choice.
he's made a career out of like being like a funny cameo in movies. So it's like when he's like a real cameo in this, you're like, but this is a joke, right? Like, are we supposed to laugh? I'm not sure.
It was, and just the way it's done is so nuts. Anyway. But that encounter that he has with Dr. Mann is a thematic one, right? Where Dr. Mann is talking about like survival requires deceit. It requires dishonesty. And it you know, we have to basically stab each other in the back, and it's our survival instinct, and it's science. And like, he's speaking to, and this is, it's not, and then right after that, they find out about the lie, right? That Dr. Brand Sr. has been lying the whole time, Michael Caine's character, about there ever being a hope of getting humanity off the planet. And then we see, you know, Amelia Brand, Anne Hathaway, processing the lie that her father lied to her about that to get her to go, because he believed that was necessary to save the species. And we see this theme coming up in the text in a variety of ways, right? Where the thought was, you know, humanity can't band together unless there's some hope of saving the people that they care about. So we have to lie. And so there's this bizarre thing happening where the thematic ideas do feel organic and motivated by the characterization and the plot mechanics and the actual action of the story, the way that they should be. And then there are other times where they just feel kind of tacked on. And as you're pointing out, in a way that doesn't feel motivated by the character. If I knew a lot more about Edmonds and Amelia Brand and who they were, what their relationship was like, what she ended up having to sacrifice by letting him go to that planet in the first place, and how she like justified it to herself or made her peace with it. And then maybe just have that come out in a moment of conflict, right? Where he wants to go this way and she wants to go that way. And then she has to talk about what happened, or have it come out more organically from the story where Romilly has to intervene and he has to give the information about what happened in the backstory, whatever it is. If there's more specificity and character motivation that is rooted in the character's lived experience, and the more that we know about it, the better, then it doesn't end up feeling just like a thematic monologue. It's storytelling. It becomes storytelling in the truest sense of the word.
Also, thinking about that important scene where they are deciding which planet to go to next, and they choose wrong because they choose Matt Damon. I think there's a different version of that scene where Anne Hathaway's character Brand, she has other points about the planet that Edmund's landed on, where it's like she's seeing these signs that look better for life, better for, you know, it's farther from Gargantua, the black hole. And I think there's a different version of the scene where she doesn't undercut herself with that monologue, where this is more of a teachable moment ultimately in the character arc of Cooper, where he is so suspicious of love and so suspicious of these gut instincts that she has, in addition to the scientific rationale, that he dismisses the good science that she's presenting because he's so, I don't know, anti-feelings. And so
which he wasn't at the beginning of the movie.
Exactly.
Anyway, so yeah, this doesn't make sense in the current arc of the story. But anyway, there's a different version of that scene that doesn't require Anne Hathaway to kind of make a fool of herself, in which all that stuff could still be there. And there's a fatal flaw in the main character, Cooper, that makes him knee-jerk go against her opinion, which is, you know, then dooms them all to Matt Damon.
Yeah. We're going to look at the scene where they get back from that first planet. 23 years have gone by, and Cooper watches the video. And I think we can talk more about this middle sequence then, because I think it's where the movie is the strongest in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I think what you're hitting on here, Alex, kind of also takes us to the third act, which is, as you're saying, in that scene where Amelia has to argue for going to this other planet, she starts with a scientific argument that is fact-based and then escalates to, but I feel it because love, and love is science. And like that construction has to happen because the movie's position isn't that love is an ephemeral, like human, magical, instinctual something or other. Like the movie is saying love is the fifth dimension. Love is, like, literally Cooper says, my love for Murph is quantifiable. And I think it's a really interesting, and it feels sort of Nolan-esque perspective to, like, instead of embracing, like, love kind of is magic and we can't explain it, and there's just some instinctual thing that will always draw us to the people we love. It tries to say, no, love is science, and you can measure it by going into a black hole just right. Like, I feel like it kind of undercuts its own emotional message, or at least it does for me. And I feel like because that is its stance, that's partially also what's driving the progression of some of these arguments, is that, yeah, you have to ultimately be saying love is science. And then we get into this, like, third act where Cooper is in a fifth dimension created by future us to send him into his daughter's bookcase to do the thing because he can follow love quantifiably. It's just interesting that I feel like it tries too hard to intellectualize some of the meaning, and therefore makes it a little silly in the process.
Yeah, it's really wild in that Tesseract sequence how many conclusions Cooper comes to about the reality he's in, very, very confidently. Like, must be us in the future, must be love is the fifth dimension. Like, yeah, he's very confident with no data to back these things up.
Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, we talked about the movie Contact.
This movie is like, what if Contact had Matthew McConaughey?
But also, what if Contact tried to explain everything in the end, versus letting it be what it is.
Versus letting it be, Jodie Foster had one experience and she can't explain it, and that's the conclusion of her character arc, is having to admit that she can't explain it.
Right.
It's really interesting because you have, I'm sorry, the name of the producer, I need to double check it, but the story for Interstellar was, basically originated with Linda Obst and Kip Thorne. Linda Obst, the producer, and Kip Thorne, the physicist, who also did Contact. So like the feelings of contact are so here right now, but the themes in that movie, we talked about that movie. The themes in that movie are the entire construction of it, pretty much. There's some goofiness. It's not a perfect movie, but it really externalizes its thematic ideas in a very clear way, and the finale makes a ton of sense, actually, because of what it's about. And a character having to admit that her emotional experience, her connection with her father, in fact, is not scientific, and it's not logical, and it's not really provable to anybody else. And it kind of leaves you, the relationship between faith and science, it sort of leaves you in the middle of the two of them. And this one just feels like, it's so married to being literal that it makes itself a little absurd. Or a lot absurd in some cases.
Yeah. I think that's really ultimately my biggest bump with this movie is I think that is trying to make this theme, like you're saying, literal, kind of makes it trip over itself as it tries to plug in all the pieces and kind of make this aha reveal. Oh, he was the ghost the whole time.
And then he shook Anne Hathaway's hand in the rocket.
Right, like on the way, he does a drive-by, like handshake.
Like, good game, good game.
He's going into the black hole. I kind of like that.
And also, they love each other now, apparently, at the end. Like, you get back to your family, you're with your family that you've been trying to get back to. And then your family's just like, never mind, go be with Brand. You guys love each other because love.
I want to circle back around to all the really great sequences in Act 2, but just while we're on Act 3, that was where I was just leaving the theater. I had this feeling of what? Like that was how this movie ended. Was we've been trying to get back to Murph this whole time. Like that's hammered into us of like, I promised her I would get home. I'm gonna get home to her. And we have the briefest of interactions in the hospital room. And she, who has been in like cryo sleep, who has had a whole life, who theoretically has no idea what has happened in her father's experience because he just woke up and just arrived here. She is confident that the best thing for him to do now is to go find Brand and be with Brand. Right. Does she even remember Brand? Like, does she even know like that they like formed a friendship relationship? Like that, it's such a wild ending to this story. I just don't understand why that is how we go out.
I think this was my third time seeing the movie in 11 years. And when he woke up in the hospital, I was like, what?
That whole ending is really trippy. Right. Like it's a real, it's like, am I hallucinating? This is, whoa.
Right.
And I think just a simple time jump would have done it. Like we have the scene where they reunite for the first time. He's at the hospital bed. Some kind of time jump to now they're looking out the window overlooking the farm, and she's like, you got to go back to Brand. So I can at least in my head fill in.
Right.
Maybe they spent a bunch of time catching up. But
like
it's literally within the same scene.
Yeah. I had the same thought as Alex was talking, just like if we just had that little anyway, a couple days later. Yeah.
Well, so rewinding a bit to the midpoint of this movie, because I do think the middle, the bookends of this movie have some bumps, especially the third act for me. But the middle of it, I think, is really powerful and really great. And I am along for the ride. The stakes, I feel, they go down to that first planet, Miller's planet, trying to I really want to know, what does it mean? The data's there. They land, it's all water. And then the huge wave comes and they've set up the stakes. I think this is another great example of good Nolan exposition where I feel the ticking time. The music is helping all of that, but you understand and you viscerally feel 1 minute here is 10 years at home or whatever that is. And I think that's so effective. And then it kind of culminates and they, Anne Hathaway's character tries to get the data, which would be really important, but makes things go wrong. They lose a bunch of time. They manage to barely get off the ship. They return, and 23 years...
They lose someone. Doyle dies.
Doyle dies, right. He's out. They get back, and 23 years has passed. And I feel like part of even my like hesitance to rewatch this movie is because I didn't want to feel that again, because I did. It is so visceral, that like gut sinking. Like, yeah, it's really effective. It's really painful.
Just real quick, I just want to say, like, yeah, that's a great example of when the exposition works, because of there's a simplicity to it. You know, time here equals this time here. There are literal drawings where they're like, we're going to do this. We're going to whip around this planet. We're going to do this thing, and that's good. Oh, that could work. And then there's obviously the emotional connection, where it's just like every second on that planet means like time you are missing with a loved one, right? So it's just a really good example of all the science actually meaning something to us as the audience, as opposed to the sort of the NASA dump, right? Where it's just like, here's a bunch of stuff that's like, save humanity, I guess, but it doesn't have the weight that it does in the leading up to the sequence, and then as we're about to watch, the aftermath of the sequence.
And also just really great spectacle, Christopher Nolan style, with the waves.
Absolutely.
And just the going to that theme you kind of mentioned, Trisha, of, you know, like, nature isn't evil, it's just existing, and like there's such extremes in this universe. It's just, you know, it's just existing. Giant freaking waves are not trying to kill you, but they will kill you.
Yeah. And so Coop gets back, starts to review the messages that have come in over the last 23 years, and we get like one of the most beautiful scenes ever. So let's watch this for a little bit.
We've got years of messages stored.
Play it from the beginning.
I met another girl, Dad. I really think this is the one.
Your grandpa. His name's Jesse.
Her grandpa died last week. I have to let you go. I hope that you're at peace.
So, the scene is so beautiful. I want to talk about the structure and just the aesthetic things that are happening here. So, writing-wise, I think just the rhythm and dynamics, first of all, where it sits in the greater sequence of, you know, the first half of the second act, we just had this huge thing, and then we get to this scene, which is so quiet and so gentle, and just like creates this huge amount of focus on what's happening here. We get these 3 video messages where we see young Tom, and, you know, they tell a story across these 3 messages, right? And create great dynamics within themselves. So young Tom, he's reporting back, he's met a girl. We get this, we see, you know, Coop crying at just the time and the experiences that he's lost, and just like realizing that. Second message, we see older Tom introducing baby boy, you're a grandfather. We see the like joy, Cooper like waves at the camera, right? And then we get that final message where he's, you know, explaining that like grandpa died. It's heartbreaking. And we're also seeing Tom believes that like Cooper's dead, and that he's not coming back, and that he like abandoned them essentially.
And Jesse,
The baby
baby
died
died.
as well.
Yeah.
Their baby, right?
which is like, yeah, very throwaway in the delivery. Yeah,
It is, and I want to come back to that.
Yeah. So just the structure of this creates this really great dynamic of sadness and sorrow, and then a little bit of joy, and then just like total heartbreak. We have the cinematography where, you know, the spinning of the ship is making the sun like flash bright on his face, in and out. Oftentimes in movies that annoys me, and here I think it's exactly right and really, really great. The music is quiet and beautiful, and cuts off right when like the final message like suddenly cuts off. And then also just the performance is like ridiculous from Matthew McConaughey. So just introducing these things that I think are working really, really great in this first half of the scene, and are just so successful.
Yeah. I love how quickly it gets into it also. Like, he comes back and he's so singularly focused. He goes and sits down. They tell him there's 23 messages. He takes half a second to brace himself, but he's just so desperate to hear what has happened to his family, to hear their voices. And it's like just the directness of that action, play it from the beginning, is what he says. And it speaks volumes to his care. And yeah, the just heartbreak of having missed so much of it. And in the video message dialogue, I love that it leaves these gaps in information and gaps in time, and like the implication, because we spend so much of it focused on Matthew McConaughey's face and we're mostly just hearing the voice from the screen. There's almost an implication that there are more messages, right? That he is listening to like maybe hours worth of messages, and we're just kind of hearing snippets in some ways. The editing doesn't necessarily indicate a time cut, but the gaps in information almost do. And making us do some work to do like a 2+2 on what has happened with Tom in his life. Like, I met another girl, right? He doesn't say I met a girl, I met another girl. So it's like, there's been other relationships. He's a little bit older, blah, blah, blah. Like, and then even to the detail of, you know, he says, what happened with Jesse? Or he says, it's just been really hard with Jesse and all. And then he just kind of bows his head for a minute, and you're like, oh, something horrible has happened. He says, we buried him in the back 40, you know, which is a reference to their land. It's farming term. And the back 40 acres right back there. And it's just like, Tom doesn't say, I'm still working on the farm, Dad. It just identifies this sense of place and speaks to this shared history. The same thing with, like, we hear about Donald when Jesse is born. We know he's still alive, but again, in an organic, believable way. Like, Donald says he's already earned the great part, so we can just leave it at that. And then it goes into, you know, Grandpa died. We buried him in the back 40 next to Grandpa, next to Jesse, or whatever it is. I can't remember what he says. Next to Mom, and Grandpa and Jesse. It's just beautifully written dialogue and beautifully performed. And Matthew McConaughey's performance here is just staggering. And it's, you know, they memed it to death because you can try to mock it.
Yeah.
But it's, you can't mock it. It's so beautiful and heartfelt. I was watching this with my family because we were on vacation with my parents and like all the grandkids and everybody in my family. The grandkids weren't all watching this.
Yeah.
The older people were watching it. But everybody was weeping. We were all just weeping. And we'd all seen it before. And I was trying to be tough. I was like, stop crying, everybody. This movie isn't that good. We're all just like crying.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey's face watching this, those things is me watching this scene. It's very, very meta. But no, yeah, I mean, his performance, just from an acting perspective, it's the two emotions at once, right? The joy in seeing all of these videos and the sadness and devastation for not being there for those moments, right? So it's like he is smile crying through a lot of it, right? And like that's the thing I think that makes it so beautiful. One, it's just very believable, like his performance just feels incredibly authentic. But two, because it's not just like, oh, I'm sad that I wasn't there for it. It's, I'm so happy to be seeing all this and so sad that I wasn't there for it at the same time. And it's a weird thing to act because his character was gone for like an hour or two, right? Like a very short amount of time. It's not like he was in solitary confinement for 23 years and then came out and was like, oh my gosh, I get to find. It's like he just went on a mission for a little bit for like lunch and then came back and was like, well, here's 23 years of your children's lives, right? And it's like, that's a crazy thing to conceptualize, but then also to have to perform that, you know. And like you said, Trish, he just goes in with that urgency of just like, I need to see what I missed in the little snippet of time that my reality, the little snippet of time that I was gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of trippy in the way that I was saying the end of the movie feels trippy. It's like, this is not a human experience you can have anywhere outside of sci-fi. Like, this is a time travel experience, and that's a whole new tangle of emotions that's really cool to explore through cinema. One thing I'll just call about the editing, I really love how we do get into this rhythm of, you know, kind of a shot of his face, shot of the screen, but then we do cut behind his chair in this kind of tracking shot coming around the chair, and that is also what signals to us that there is a time jump. We've maybe gone through many videos at this point. Now Casey Affleck's on the screen. So just really simple choices like that tell your audience subconsciously, they're like, oh, okay, time has passed. just because you cut to a different angle. That's all you need.
Yeah. And I love the little moment where he's shaking his head. Like there's a couple of them where he's like, basically shaking his head no. And he doesn't have a piece of dialogue there, but again, it's giving another layer to the emotion. Like you're highlighting the layers there, Brian, in the performance, and it's the other layer of like resisting, right? It's like almost those stages of grief where it's like, no, this can't be. It's just denial. Like, no, this cannot be what it is. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. So beautiful. And there's more. And that's also what I love about the scene is the cadence and the rhythm of it. So, so Tom cuts off. We continue.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, Murph.
You son of a bitch. I never made one of these when you were still responding because I was so mad at you for leaving. And then when you went quiet, it seemed like I should live with that decision, and I have. But today's my birthday. And it's a special one because you once told me that when you came back we might be the same age. And today I'm the age you were when you left. So it would be a real good time for you to come back.
So good. So part of what's happening in the first half of the scene also is, he wants to know about Murph. I think there's we see like one video message where, I think the John Lithgow character is sort of like, Murph is upset. She didn't want to make one. It sort of sets up this expectation of maybe she'll send one later. And I think, even while we're going through the Tom stuff, there's a little bit of that, but like, is Murph going to be there? Is Murph going to be there? And so then, of course, there's this reveal. I love the blocking also, where he like reaches out to grab the thing because that loss, and then like suddenly he's like holding Murph, and she's 23 years older, and revealed Jessica Chastain, and all the stuff. And I love the editing, like you were saying, Alex. There's such great editing in this scene, but that it stays on Murph for a really long time, and Jessica Chastain's beautiful performance. And then when it creates this like wonder also of like, how is Coop reacting to this? And then you cut to his face and he's like broken. And that's just so effective, so affecting. And then at the end of the sequence, we get the cut to, and now we're with Murph. Like we just did this crazy handoff across galaxies. And now we're in Murph's story world, and we're kind of into this midpoint sequence. And it's just such a elegant handoff, and it's perfect. It's just really, really good.
And also the juxtaposition between the previous sequence, half of the scene where it's like we're watching him in real time take all of it in, and in this time we're just watching her, and it's almost like, for me at least, I'm like, I forgot about Coop for a second. I'm just watching her performance and everything, and then you cut back to him, and like you said, he's broken. It's just like such a big thing. And the only thing I'll say here, the main thing I want to say is just in the text, it's, hey, Dad, you son of a bitch, right? So again, going back to like script versus screen, if you're reading the script, it's very clear. I don't know if the script says, any kind of like character stuff, but just from those two lines, it's very clear. But in her performance, it's within one frame of her being on screen. It's like, I know 23 years later, she is still bitter. She is still holding all this. And obviously the very clear fact that we have not seen her up until now, right? We've seen his son grow up and everything. And then now suddenly she's here. But there's just something about the look on her face and the way she says, hey, Dad, that I'm just like, I can't believe how much you just communicated with 2 words and a look.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it too, in the video message from Tom, he reports on Murph like a couple of times when he's a teen. He says, Murph took Grandpa's car and crashed it, but she's okay. And then like she came back for Jesse's funeral, or Grandpa's funeral, I think is what he says. And like she doesn't come around much, but she came for that. And so we're given tiny glimpses. We're kind of primed to see Murph, where that is like very artfully done expository work that relieves this section of having to do that expository work. She doesn't have to explain that much about like what she's been up to or where she lives now. We know she doesn't live on the farm anymore. We know she and Tom are not super close anymore. We already have that expository information. So we're able to just focus on the emotional connection here and that she's trying to express. And like all she has to tell us, she doesn't even really have to do this, but she says, you know, I didn't make one of these when you were still responding. And I've lived with the decision of never hearing from you again, basically. But I want to, you know, but there's still, she's not so coldly detached from it all that she's not going to weep on this video message because she misses him so much. And it's just really like the balance of like catching us up, like what you're saying about the handoff, catching us up so that we know enough about Murph to get dropped right into her POV at this midpoint switch and still feel like totally emotionally involved in it is just, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'll say, I think this edit where we see her reaching on the video screen and then we just cut to her in this angle here, now in the room with her in a totally different place and time, conceivably maybe, is one of my favorite moments ever, definitely in this movie. And it's a kind of a splash of cold water in the way that the revelation of how much time passed when they got back from the planet. It's like it's a shock to the system, but in the best possible way, where now I'm kind of reinvigorated and like, oh wow, wait, now the movie's here. What's going to happen now? Like, what is her story? What is she doing? And that's always the most exciting feeling in a movie, when there's a confident like slap in the face like this, that you can tell the director knows what they're doing and it lands so perfectly, but I have no idea where we're going now. And that's an exhilarating feeling. And this is one of those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to bring us into the rest of the movie, then it's a dramatic question shift here, because the dramatic question up until this point is basically, is Coop going to be home? You know, I had this feeling of like, I almost wanted to be kind of the corny, like, I promise I'll be home by your 14th birthday or your 16th birthday, whatever it is, you know? And then it's like, she's 35, right? And it's just like, that's devastating, but also now what are we waiting for? Yes, there's the big dramatic question of, are we going to save humanity, right? Like, that's obviously a big deal, but we don't feel that as an audience the same way we feel their relationship. So as you're saying, Alex, the switch to like, oh, now what? What does this mean? What does this switch mean? It adds a little mystery, a little something to kind of latch onto. But I do feel like a problem with the second half of this movie is the dramatic question and the urgency starts to just get stripped away, where there's nothing I'm necessarily rooting for or waiting to see what happens next the way that I am in the first half.
Interesting.
In the same way that time doesn't move the same for Coop in the future, in the interstellar space, the urgency starts to really, the urgency dilation starts to really occur between the Earthbound storyline and the space storyline, which we made a whole video about.
Yeah. Well, and that it's on one hand, I think the urgency is crystal clear, and I'm more bought into the stakes than ever because of what's happened so far in this emotional thing of like, I need Coop to save humanity and get back to his daughter. It's just that then once, you know, Murph is sort of our co-protagonist, her stakes don't feel as, you know, time is of the essence. And it's the intercutting between those two things that I think creates that kind of dissonance. Yeah, well, you know, there's so much more to talk about, but I think this scene exemplifies like the benefit of doing a big swing, is that like it can be bumpy, there can be things that feel weird and feel silly, but it earns something like this scene, which is beautiful and special, and to me, it's absolutely worth it. So I love that this movie exists because we get this scene and so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take away from Interstellar? So, Brian, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Although I'll need your help in maybe defining what thing I'm trying to identify here, which I was going to call it tonal shifts, but I don't think it's a tonal shift. It's a shift in content and information and believability and world building. So it's basically like we open this movie literally in like documentary style, like people who seem like non-actors are going to be talking to a camera, and then we're going to hang out on a farmhouse for a while. And yes, we're like in space, and you know, like we are in the future. There's a drone, there's this. And then NASA, whiplash, black hole, wormhole, they called you here. You got to go to space. You're the only person who can do it. You leave in 10 minutes. Let's go. It's just like, what is happening, right? And then we have the same thing. Well, we have the same thing with the love monologue, which is just like, oh, now we're here. We just went from here to here, like, and I wasn't prepped for it, right? And then, of course, we have the same thing going into the climax of like, hey, you're in a 3-dimensional version of a 5-dimensional space. Like, have fun. Go figure that out. Put everything together. And it's these big shifts in again, I don't know what the right word is that I'm looking for, but just sort of informational shifts. And those are really disorienting. And I think those are the moments where the movie just like pushes me away for 10 minutes. And then I have to kind of slowly crawl back to be like, okay, cool, now that we're here. And, you know, this midpoint sequence that we just looked at, it's the complete opposite of what I'm talking about. It's Coop and Murph, their relationship has been set up. The time dilation, science and everything, and the stakes and the urgency of the mission we're going to go on have been set up. That didn't go well. We're back on the ship. Let's watch these videos. It's just like, the reason it's so effective is it's just this perfect marriage of those two things, right? As opposed to the opening going into the NASA thing, where it's just like suddenly the movie is this other thing, and now people have to talk at you for 10 to 15 minutes to like explain where we're going from here, right? And I was thinking, not necessarily fixes, I was just thinking about this as a concept where I was like, I love that this movie starts the way it does, like so toned down and so visceral, and so just like we're just with people being people, you know, and then we're gonna really care about this relationship between this father and daughter. But then it's such a big shift to go to the NASA stuff. And I was like, a less interesting version of this is Anne Hathaway's the main character for the first act, and she's working at NASA, and they're trying to figure this out, and they're trying to do this, and we're trying to get to space, and oh my gosh, they are here, and we get this, da da da, and then Coop shows up, and you're like, oh, what's this? What's going on here, right? And then you don't get the relationship stuff there, but you do get all the science there, right? Another version, which is sort of blending the two, is we get sort of a cross-cutting, as someone was saying earlier, like, you know, Michael Caine shows up and he's like, hey, we're going on this mission, we need you, da da da. Or we do this cross-cut where it's like Anne Hathaway and Matthew McConaughey are both the main character for the first act. So we're getting all the science stuff we need to get us into the second act, and we're getting all the relationship stuff we need to get in the second act. I'm not even saying that's better. I'm just saying there's an issue here with this big shift, you know? So it's not a fix as much as it's just a sort of something I was thinking about, of like how to put these things together and where these issues come in. These issues come when there's just like this big, like we went from here to here, boom. So yeah, just the lesson is just be careful with that. You know, if you have a big shift in your story where you're suddenly going from this to this, and you have a whole lot of, if you're like, we need characters to just like say exposition for 8 minutes now to get, well, then something is wrong there. Probably, you probably need to do some more work, you know, on the back end or on the front end to get us to that point. So yeah, it's just an interesting thing that this movie does, where it feels like there are these 3 or 4 moments where it just goes whiplash, new ideas, lots of new stuff now. And it's like, I love so much of this movie. And those are the parts where and I think a lot of people, a lot of reviewers of this movie and everything, just get thrown off really sort of violently for a little while before having, hopefully getting back on to then still appreciate it as to still be like, I'm still there at the end when he's there with Murph, Ellen Burstyn, you know, I'm just like, yeah, weird, bumpy, whatever, but like, I'm still here. Like I keep coming back on, but at the same time, I'm not going to fault anyone for just being like, you totally lost me at point X. And I never got back on after that.
Yeah. Yeah, this movie has mode shifts, and we talk a lot about movies teaching you how to watch them in the first 10, 20 minutes of the movie. And I think the problem is this movie teaches you how to watch it and then kind of changes the rules on you. And it does that a couple times. And like you're saying, never so much that I'm permanently lost, but it is enough that like, oh, this is a different rule set than you put forth. This is a different style and pace than you put forth before. And that I think is easy to lose track of. But I think in a movie like this, where you're going to be spanning like the dynamic range of content that you're talking about is tricky. And in some ways, it's almost impressive that there isn't more like mode shifts that ruin everything. But when you are shifting from hard sci-fi to like love is the fifth dimension, and how much you put into both of those things, and even just the filmmaking style, like we're talking about this opening with this kind of documentary style, put me in a very different mode that then we kind of forget about for the rest of the movie until we get to the end, and it turns out that was
a
the
museum
videos playing on the museum of their house. Like
the weird tour guide who's like, hey, you want to go live in your museum house? Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think it also, what you were talking about, brings up the idea of perspective, and like why is Coop's perspective the best perspective for the first act? Because I think, as you were saying, it establishes the relationship, but creates this huge exposition gap where he doesn't know anything and he has to learn a lot of stuff really fast. And so we do also. And so just double checking that the perspective from which you are telling your story is the right one, and what could be gained or lost by changing that is a useful experiment to do.
Yeah. My lesson is the stuff I said, but the way Michael said it.
I had the benefit of listening to you say it and then think about it, and then I could just regurgitate it. Alex, what's your lesson?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the video we made, the Nolan crosscut video, where we talk about one of my favorite sequences in the movie, which is the docking sequence where Matt Damon sabotages them and they have to chase him down, and that really amazing sequence. And how it's weird. It felt weird in the movie to cut between that and Murph's story at that moment. In the traditional kind of Christopher Nolan, everything's building to a head sort of way, which he does so well in The Dark Knight and Inception. But I was thinking about Murph's story and how we get to where she is in that part of the movie. And at that point in the movie, she is actively trying to gain access to her bedroom in order to maybe discover something related to her ghost as a child. And so like her goals are so unclear at that moment and so kind of unbound that, there's such clear boundaries and a ticking clock on the goals that Matthew McConaughey's character Coop is facing. The future of all humanity is riding on them succeeding in this mission, and a single man, Dr. Mann, has selfishly betrayed the mission for his own survival, and is now going to stupidly blow up the spaceship, and everything is going to be ruined. Like, that is the clear bound conflict that needs to be resolved. For Murph, even before this sequence, there's this kind of vague idea of solving gravity, or like solving the equation of gravity. I think even the movie could do a better job, I think, of explaining, I guess, just kicking the dots a bit more of, to remove a population from the Earth with current physics is impossible, with current, fossil fuels is impossible. We need to actually come up with a new physics or new source of energy to do this. And we are almost there, but need to get all the way there. And I think there's something about Murph's storyline that it's all so kind of ambiguous and so open that it doesn't work in the way that I think the movie wants it to work, as a, cutting back and forth parallel storyline with Cooper's storyline. I do think you could have done a rewrite on her storyline where, it's not about the ghost. I mean, this is a bigger rewrite with Act 3 and everything, but there could be a bigger conspiracy storyline there with the lies that have been told and Brand has given up on solving this problem a long time ago, and he's been lying the whole time, but actually she's had an insight that he never could have imagined. Whatever. I think there could be a time-bound and kind of propulsive story for Murph with kind of a conspiracy on Earth that doesn't go into kind of the ambiguity of the ghost in the room and the brother who's kind of dumb and the kid with the asthma and all that stuff. And so I just think, I think the lesson maybe is kind of the same lesson as we had in our video, which is if you want to have these parallel storylines and have them build together towards a climax, I think they both have to have equally clear and kind of time-bound conflicts. And Murph's arc and conflict is just so open in this movie.
She turns her car around. She's just like driving away and she's like, hang on, I have a feeling.
The ghost.
I'm going to set my field on fire because of a feeling.
The ghost might have the answers to the equation of gravity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, clarity in goals and obstacles is really important. Understanding, as you were saying, the bounds of the actions that you can take so they have meaning. And I was also thinking, as you were speaking about, again, contact, as Trisha brought up, like what does Murph's final choice mean thematically? Like that's kind of ambiguous too. Like I guess she's choosing to believe that the love of her dad is so real that it's the ghost, like
moving the hands on the watch.
Moving the hands, like it's plot-wise, it's not a super clear connection. Thematically, it's not a super clear connection. And as we've talked about, it's intercut with stakes that are crystal clear. And I think that almost works even further to its detriment. And so, it's an interesting, another great like dichotomy that comes with big swings of simultaneously we're seeing something done really, really well and kind of something that's bumpy for these other reasons that are haven't a little lacking.
I think another lesson is just, your poor actors, if you're not giving them enough context or, story foundation for the conclusions they're going to leap to, it's really hard to act leaping to these conclusions. For both Matthew McConaughey in The Tesseract, leaping to all his conclusions, and for poor Jessica Chastain having to kind of like sit in different parts of the bedroom and then come to the conclusion on camera that like her dad is the ghost and the watch has the gravity equation inside of it.
And Anne Hathaway in the monologue.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Just It's poor actors.
Yeah. And you have some of the best actors there are doing it.
Yeah.
And
they do their
trying
darndest. They really do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Trisha, what's your lesson?
Yeah, I have a really, really simple lesson, which is that if you're going to make us care about a character relationship, it's nice to provide us with a snapshot of what that relationship is like at its best. Why is it good? Why is it beautiful? Make us care about it. And I think the first act does a beautiful job of that with Cooper and Murph. There are a few moments that I really love. I love the moment actually during the drone sequence. Maybe I like the drone sequence. Where he like takes control of the drone on his laptop and then he like lets her fly it for a minute, right? Where he's like, "Oh, come here, you can fly it," and
because you can fly a drone on a trackpad.
Listen,
it's fine. Go for it.
I mean, it's about the relationship, Brian.
I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can. Yeah.
That's a really wonderful moment. The one that I love is the one where he's like, "Okay, we solved gravity. Great job." Or sorry, there's gravity in the ghost, and this is ones and zeros. It's binary. Get in the car. No, actually, you can't come with me. I'm going to the coordinates by myself. But then she's like hiding in the seat, right? He drives away to go to the coordinates that they find, and she's right there. And he's mad for half a second, but then he's like, all right, let's go. And he brings her with him. And that moment is so beautiful that they call it back when he drives away later.
The callback
where he
is
looks,
devastating.
He looks under the jacket. It's just so clean. You're externalizing the core of the relationship in action. And there are other wonderful moments as well that I really love. where she says, "Didn't you bring the bolt cutters?" Right? She's like falling asleep in the car, and he's like, "This is the end of the road," and she says, "Where you didn't bring the bolt cutters?" And he just goes, "That's my girl." And then they go in, and when he wakes up and he's talking to Tars for the first time, which is wild, but he's like, "I'm not saying anything until you give me my daughter. Give me my daughter right now." There's just a lot packed into the first act that creates that wonderful snapshot of the relationship. And then we get the watches and the scene there, and where she's crying and she kind of won't say goodbye to him. It's all really devastating. But again, it's being externalized in a way with using the language that you've given us for the relationship already. We already have the shorthand, because lived-in relationships have shorthand. They just have their own language to them, their own rhythm to them. And you need to give that to us at the beginning of the movie for us to understand what it means when he looks under the coat and he's driving away and he's sad and she comes out of the house. It does all that really well.
Yeah. 100%. I feel like it's, there's maybe kind of ties into my lesson kind of as I'm listening to all of this. It's sort of like there are these moments where in this movie, things are really clear in what they mean. And then there are these moments when it's really not. And that's a very simple observation, but I think it speaks to how difficult and how important clarity is. And even, thinking about what you were saying, Alex, the spinning out docking sequence, this time I was able to engage with it because the clarity of the theme and what it meant was more present for me when it wasn't the first time. But, Anne Hathaway having the conversation early on with Cooper that's essentially like, nature isn't evil. The only evil is what we bring with us. And then go to this planet and Dr. Man, his name is Man, is there and he does this thing and it's evil. Like the clarity of that kind of thematic moral weight adds stakes to what's happening. The less clear stakes of solve the gravity equation, love is quantifiable, means that I have distance from it. And so there's lots of ways to arrive at clarity. Like you're saying, Trisha, there can be the shorthand that communicates these things. But I do think you need clarity for audiences to understand and get the meaning from that. And for me, my lesson was also thinking about the clarity and the weight of the stakes. As we talked about in that scene where they come back and 23 years has passed, I feel that. And I think it's because the movie takes care to establish the rules and the sacrifices required to be doing these things. The first docking sequence after they take off, we see Coop and the crew have to navigate and gently dock into the spaceship. It's setting up the docking sequence, but it's also showing this is important. This matters. What they're doing here is hard. The movie's going to stop and focus on it and make a scene out of they're worried about this thing. And I think a lot of the second act does a good job of they're really worried about space travel and all the things that can go wrong. And it's going to take months to go from here to here so that you understand what it means when they take a risk and it goes really wrong. And so that's something I appreciate about this movie, and kind of my lesson is making a big deal out of the big steps your characters are taking and highlighting what is the sacrifice, what is the fear, what are they afraid of, whether it goes wrong or right. I think it helps create the weight of the journey and understand later in the movie what people have done to get here and what they've lost along the way so that it's impactful. And I think this movie does a really good job of that. Big movie, lots to talk about, big swings. I'm glad that it seems like all of us maybe walked away with a new appreciation for Interstellar. And I feel like this is, for me, a theme I'm expecting to see a lot in the big swing summer. That's kind of what I'm trying to instill in myself. Is look at these movies from a new perspective, appreciate the things that are great about them, learn from them, and maybe the bumps will get a little bit smoothed out along the way.
I feel like my only interaction with this movie over the last 5 to 7 years has just been hearing you and Alex kind of vaguely groan about it whenever it's brought up or whatever. And I think that kind of eroded my feeling.
Sorry.
And then I was watching it the other night and I was like, wait a minute, do I love this movie? Like I was like, and it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool to go in being like, all right, let's see. And then just being like really happy most of the time watching it.
Totally.
The unfortunate thing is when a movie is like 80 to 90% going to be my favorite movie ever, which is what I like wanted from the Christopher Nolan space movie, I'm just so much more critical of all the bumps. You know, like if it was a genre or a director I didn't like care about, I'd be like, oh yeah, wow, what a better than average, like really amazing IMAX experience movie. Hell yeah. But because the expectations were so sky high and it's so in my wheelhouse and so exactly everything I've ever wanted as like an aspiring filmmaker, when it doesn't hit the mark, it's like extra painful and like almost like a personally offensive way. So it's like, it's not rational. That's what I'm saying, is like the attention to the bumps that I give this movie is not normal nor like the average person's experience. And I realize that.
Yeah. Ditto. Before we wrap up, what else have you guys been watching? Trisha, what have you been watching recently?
Yeah, so I have these weird things where I want to watch everything of a certain story, especially if it's been made a bunch of times. So I've seen like every A Star Is Born. And today on the Discord, someone was talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I've seen all of those. And then like all of the Tom Ripley things, and then, you know, like all the submarine movies. Anyway, another one of my things of those are Dangerous Liaison / Cruel Intentions. I've seen all of them. And one of them came out on Prime late last year. It was a Prime series. And so I was like, well, I've got to watch this. And it stars our best friend from The White Lotus season 3, Sarah Catherine Hook, who played Piper. And she plays a very different character in the Cruel Intentions TV series. And I have finished it now. I had a lot of fun watching it. It's not self-serious or... I'm just going to say, it just doesn't take itself that seriously. It's just a kind of frothy... slightly sanitized, not that sexy, but like kind of very flirty, sort of sexy version of this story. I mean, there are so many good versions of it that you can just go out and watch, but Cruel Intentions is just fun. They've truly adapted it too in a way that's interesting. It takes place in a different world than any of the other adaptations that I've seen. This one takes place at a DC area university. And like in sorority life, essentially. And Sarah Catherine Hook plays the Sarah Michelle Gellar. Is that who that is? From the 90s movie, if you're familiar with that one. So yeah, a lot of fun. Cruel Intentions. I've heard it's not being renewed for a second season, so that makes me sad. But there are 8 episodes of it that you can watch if you, like me, want to see every version of Dangerous Liaisons that has ever been made. It's out there for you.
I never saw Cruel Intentions, and I felt like I was a bad middle schooler.
Have you seen any of the Dangerous Liaisons?
I don't think so.
The liaisons are so dangerous, Michael.
They sound dangerous. And
John Malkovich is in a Ripley and in a Dangerous Liaison.
The John Malkovich Dangerous Liaisons is really good.
I just know the Annie Lennox Walking on Broken Glass video, which I watched many, many times as a teen.
Checks out.
Nice. Alex, what have you been watching recently?
So there's so many things on my list to watch, but also when you're married, you have to figure out a compromise, or what does your partner want to watch? My husband has been very much wanting to finish The Handmaid's Tale because it is concluding at last for the final season. And so I watched the final season of The Handmaid's Tale, and you know what? Stuff happened this season. Lots of things happened. They were emotional. There were some really good scenes. Like, it's a very indulgent show, but sometimes that's nice. Sometimes I want to see a really beautifully shot sequence with really good music, really dramatic, really emotional, all the emotions so turned to 100. I actually had quite a good time. So, you know what? If you dropped off The Handmaid's Tale, if you were kind of into the first seasons but fell off like I did, you might want to finish it.
It's been on for like 93 years.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the 6th or 7th season. I don't know. But it's been on for a few seasons. It is now done. And I can say that things happened. And you know what? I don't regret watching it. The final season of The Handmaid's Tale.
Nice.
Okay. Brian, what have you been watching?
Well, it's been a couple months. In that time, a friend of mine put together a group of I think there's about 10 of us to do a monthly viewing party called Dumpster Dive Revive, in which whoever's hosting that month has to bring a movie to the table that you loved as like a kid or in college, some like formative time in your life. It's not necessarily good. Maybe it's terrible, but you personally have love for it. It's not just being like, hey, everyone, let's watch this terrible movie. This movie maybe is terrible, but I want to share it with everyone. So far we've watched Bordello of Blood, Lake Placid, a movie called Cherry 2000, which none of us had ever heard of, which came out on the heels of Mad Max and Blade Runner and is desperately trying to be both. And it was a blast. But maybe the worst movie I've ever seen. It was a blast. But my pick, which I think I mentioned in early episodes of the podcast, was Interstate 60. Which is written and directed by Bob Gale, who famously wrote the Back to the Future trilogy. But when he wrote them originally, he wanted them to be darker, less family friendly, kind of some edgier themes. And Interstate 60 is basically what happened when he got his wish. It opens with these college guys being told about a guy who goes around granting wishes and wears a bow tie and smokes like a monkey-shaped pipe. And they're like, yeah, right, that would happen. Cut to Gary Oldman riding a bicycle, bow tie, monkey pipe, bumps into Michael J. Fox getting out of a car, who is like dressed in a business suit, and swears up a storm at this event happening. He loses his phone. He's like, that phone, wishes that had never happened. Gary Oldman says, granted. And let's just say, careful what you wish for. That's how the movie opens. It's just like the energy in the room was just like, I was like being high-fived. Like, what is happening? We're having a great time here. The cast just goes on and on because the Back to the Future guy was like, come be in my movie, and everyone said okay. Not Michael J. Fox is not the only Back to the Future alum who was there. It's just it's a big swing for sure. It is just like, there are times where someone would look at me and say, this might be the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. And then there are times where you're like, nobody does this. Why isn't every movie like this? This is awesome. And it's just kind of all of those things. And I cannot promise you it's a great movie. I can promise you, you will enjoy the experience of watching it, or at the very least, when it's done, you will be glad that you have seen it.
Fascinating.
Interstate 60 Episodes from the Road, I think is the subtitle.
Wow.
Okay.
So many things exist. Okay. Very cool.
Michael.
So I recently watched a 2-episode kind of mini documentary series called Octopus on Amazon Prime Video. It kind of follows the life cycle of the giant Pacific octopus. It's narrated by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and it's a really fun, easy watch look at octopuses and how weird they are and how fascinating they are. It features various individuals that have connections to these creatures. One notable person is Tracy Morgan from 30 Rock fame, who has like the 5th largest aquarium in the world and is like really into aquatic animals. I realized most of the jokes in 30 Rock about him needing to go feed his shark aren't jokes. Like he truly, and he's like an expert on aquatic animals and is heavily featured. So that's notable. Person number one. But even more notable is one of my best friends, Dr. Jenny Hoffmeister, who's basically like a sister to me and is one of the like foremost octopus experts in the world and is just a wonderful human being, is heavily featured in this documentary as like the scientist expert. And so I'm just super proud of her and still a little bit disgusted by octopuses, but overall it was a really fun, just extremely watchable, quick like series on Amazon Prime Video. So highly recommend taking some time to learn about some octopuses in Octopus.
Nice.
It's so smart.
with an exclamation point.
Does it really have an exclamation point?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm definitely watching it now.
Octopus.
Is it a musical?
No, but it almost could be. Phoebe Waller-Bridge definitely gives it a little bit of like weird like Fleabag energy, which
Yeah.
is not like another documentary I've seen. So
How many legs do they have? 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, go ahead.
No. Get us out of here, Michael.
Yeah.
okay. This has been our conversation about Interstellar. We want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons that support us and make this show possible. If you want to support us, help us make new episodes, head over to the Beyond Screenplay Patreon, where you will get access to monthly Patreon exclusive episodes. There's a library of like over 65 Patreon exclusive episodes over there. You get ad-free episodes. You get access to our Discord, where our community is always talking about movies and shows and what's going on. So a lot of fun stuff over there. So thank you to the patrons for supporting us. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editor, Mike Wuerth, and the whole Nebula Studios team. I'm Michael Tucker. I've been joined today by Trisha Arand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. And we will see you next week for our discussion of La La Land.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.